17 seconds. That's how long it took a 4-man SAS entry team to clear a compound in eastern Baghdad. 17 seconds from breach charge detonation to the last room declared clear. Inside, they found 11 insurgents. 9 were dead. 2 were zip-tied and extracted before the dust settled. The Americans watching the operation feed from a drone circling at 8,000 feet couldn't process what they'd just seen. A senior Pentagon liaison officer stationed at the Combined Joint Special Operations Task Force headquarters in Baghdad turned to his British counterpart and said 5 words that would define the next 3 years of the Iraq War. How do they move like that? The answer to that question is a story the Pentagon didn't want told. It's a story about a warning that was issued, ignored, and then proven catastrophically wrong. It's a story about what happens when you send the most aggressively trained special operations soldiers on Earth into a city where over 200 enemy fighters are running an industrial-scale kidnapping and bombing network, and those fighters simply vanish. Not captured, not arrested, not negotiated with. Vanished. The year was 2005. Iraq was bleeding out. The insurgency had metastasized from a guerrilla nuisance into a machine of slaughter. Al-Qaeda in Iraq, led by Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, was executing between 40 and 60 vehicle-borne improvised explosive device attacks per month across the country. In Baghdad alone, sectarian death squads were dumping between 40 and 60 tortured corpses on the streets every single night. The American military had deployed approximately 160,000 personnel across Iraq, supported by the most expensive intelligence apparatus in human history: satellite coverage, signals intercept platforms, Predator and Reaper drone feeds, running 24 hours a day, and a special operations task force burning through classified budgets that would later be estimated at over $1 billion annually. And they were losing. The problem wasn't resources. The problem was speed. American special operations, primarily Delta Force and SEAL Team 6, operating under the Joint Special Operations Command, were conducting raids at an impressive tempo. General Stanley McChrystal had revolutionized the targeting cycle, compressing the fine fix-finish loop from days to hours. But the insurgents were adapting faster. Cell structures were fracturing into smaller and smaller nodes. Safe houses were being used for single nights. Bomb makers were crossing provincial boundaries between assembly and deployment. The intelligence was good. The operators were elite. But the gap between identifying a target and putting a team on that target's doorstep was still measured in hours. And hours meant the target was gone. Into this catastrophe walked a force that numbered, at its peak operational strength in Iraq, fewer than 60 operators. They were drawn from the 22nd Special Air Service Regiment, based at Sterling Limes in Hereford, supported by elements of the Special Boat Service from Poole and specialist signals and intelligence personnel from 18 Signal Regiment and the Intelligence Corps. They were designated Task Force Black, and they were about to do something that no military unit in the history of counterinsurgency warfare had done before, or has done since. Before they arrived in force, a warning was circulated. It didn't come from the enemy. It came from inside the Pentagon. A classified assessment prepared by a senior American Special Operations Planning Cell recommended against expanding the British Special Forces footprint in Baghdad. The reasoning was straightforward and, on paper, entirely logical. The British contingent was too small. They lacked the organic helicopter fleet that American Special Operations relied upon. Their communications architecture wasn't fully integrated with the American intelligence grid, and their rules of engagement, shaped by years of counterinsurgency experience in Northern Ireland, were considered by some American planners to be too restrictive for the kinetic reality of Baghdad in 2005. The assessment was blunt. One passage, later referenced by journalist Mark Urban in his book Task Force Black, noted that American planners questioned whether a force this small could generate the tempo required to disrupt AQI networks at the operational level. Translation: they're too few, too lightly equipped, and too cautious. Don't send the British. The warning was overruled. The decision to expand Task Force Black's role came from the very top of British defense, authorized by the Director of Special Forces and endorsed by the Chief of the Defense Staff. The reasoning was equally blunt. The British had been running special operations in Iraq Since 2003, they had developed their own intelligence networks in Basra and Baghdad, and they were not going to sit on the sideline while the country they had helped invade collapsed into genocide. What happened next requires understanding something fundamental about the British Special Forces system, something the Pentagon assessment completely failed to account for. The Americans measured capability in platforms, budgets, and personnel numbers. The British measured capability in something far harder to quantify: the individual operator. And the individual operator produced by the SAS selection and training pipeline was, by 2005, the end product of a system that had been refining itself for 63 years without interruption. The selection process for 22 SAS begins with a simple premise that has not changed since the regiment was reconstituted in 1947. The individual must be capable of operating alone in any environment, under any conditions, for extended periods, with minimal support. Every element of selection is designed to test this single principle to destruction. Candidates arrive at Senny Bridge training camp in the Brecon Beacons, South Wales, in groups of between 100 and 200 a. They come from every regiment and corps in the British Army: Parachute Regiment, Royal Marines, Infantry Battalions, Engineers, Signals, Artillery. They have already passed pre-selection fitness standards that would eliminate most special operations candidates worldwide. A 1.5-mile run in under 8 minutes 45 seconds, a minimum of 44 press-ups in 2 minutes, 50 sit-ups in 2 minutes, and a loaded march carrying 25 kilograms over 10 miles in under 1 hour 50 minutes. These standards are the entry ticket. They mean nothing. The first phase is called endurance. It runs for 4 weeks. In those 4 weeks, candidates complete a series of timed marches across the Brecon Beacons and the Black Mountains, carrying progressively heavier loads over progressively longer distances with progressively less information about the route. The terrain is among the most punishing in Western Europe. Exposed ridgelines above 600 meters where wind speeds regularly exceed 60 miles per hour, valleys choked with waist-deep bog, and visibility that can drop to less than 10 meters without warning. The weather in winter oscillates between freezing rain and near-zero visibility fog. Candidates navigate using map and compass only. There are no trails, there are no markers, there is no encouragement. The loads increase from 25 kilos in the first week to approximately 30 kilos by the 3rd week, plus weapon, water, and food. The distances increase from 24 kilometers to over 40 kilometers. The time limits tighten. The terrain gets worse. By the end of the 3rd week, the original group of 120 to 200 has typically been reduced to between 30 and 50. Some are injured. Stress fractures of the tibia and metatarsals are common, as are severe blisters that expose the bone of the heel. Some are withdrawn after becoming hypothermic. Some simply stop walking. The DS, directing staff, do not encourage, berate, or motivate. They simply record whether the candidate arrived at the checkpoint within the time limit. If they did, they continue. If they didn't, they're gone. The final march of endurance is called Test Week. The culminating event is the Fan Dance, a march over Penny Fan, the highest peak in the Brecon Beacons, at 886 meters, carrying a Bergen rucksack loaded to approximately 25 kilograms, plus weapon and belt kit. But the Fan Dance is merely a qualifier. The true final test is the Long Drag, a solo navigation march of approximately 64 kilometers across the full width of the Brecon Beacons, carrying the same load to be completed in under 20 hours, alone, in whatever weather the Welsh mountains deliver that day. Since 1960, at least 4 candidates have died during SAS selection marches in the Brecon Beacons. The most recent fatalities occurred in July 2013, when 3 Army reservists died of heat exhaustion during a 16-mile march in temperatures that reached 30 degrees Celsius. A former SAS training officer, speaking to author Michael Asher for his history of the regiment, described the philosophy behind endurance in terms that reveal more than any statistic. We're not looking for the fastest or the strongest. We're looking for the man who keeps going when his body has told him to stop, and his mind has agreed. That quality cannot be taught. it can only be discovered. The attrition is staggering by any military standard. Of 200 candidates who begin a typical winter selection cycle, between 140 and 170 will be gone before test week even begins. Some are removed for navigational errors. Arriving at the wrong grid reference, even by 100 meters, results in immediate failure. Some are removed for being too slow. Miss a checkpoint time by 60 seconds, and you're loaded onto a truck and driven back to Senny Bridge. There are no second chances during the march. There is no appeal. A candidate who has been performing superbly for 3 weeks can be removed on day 22 for a single missed time. The system is deliberately merciless because the operational reality it prepares for is worse. What separates SAS selection from virtually every other special operations assessment on Earth is what happens between the checkpoints. In American Special Operations Selection, Delta Force's Operator Training Course, for example, candidates move through arduous land navigation exercises, but they do so with the knowledge that a support infrastructure exists along the route. Medics are stationed at intervals. Safety vehicles patrol the roads. If a candidate collapses, he will be found within minutes. On the Brecon beacons, the candidate is alone. Genuinely, functionally alone. The DS are not tracking every candidate in real time. The mountains are vast, the weather is unpredictable, and the candidate carries the absolute certainty that if he breaks an ankle at the bottom of a ravine at 3 in the morning in driving sleet, no one is coming for him until they realize he hasn't arrived at the next checkpoint, which could be 4 or 5 hours away. This knowledge does something to a man's psychology that no amount of physical preparation can replicate. It strips away every external support structure and forces the candidate to confront a fundamental question. Can you rely entirely on yourself? A Special Forces veteran who completed selection in the late 1990s and later served multiple tours in Iraq described the psychological transformation to journalist Ben McIntyre. When you've walked 40 miles through fog so thick you can't see your own boots, with 80 pounds on your back, and you know that nobody, absolutely nobody, is going to come and find you if you fall, something changes inside you. Fear doesn't disappear, but it stops being the thing that controls you. You learn that you can function when everything inside you is screaming to stop. And once you've learned that, you can function anywhere. Those who survive endurance, typically between 15 and 30 candidates from the original intake, progress to continuation training, a phase lasting approximately 4 months. Here, the surviving candidates learn the core SAS skills, advanced demolitions, including the construction and employment of over 40 different charge types from military and improvised explosives, combat medicine to a level exceeding that of most civilian paramedics, including surgical airway insertion, chest decompression, and fluid resuscitation under fire. Advanced signals and communications, including high-frequency radio operation, satellite communications, and encrypted burst transmission, and close-quarter battle, the discipline that would define Task Force Black's war in Baghdad. Close-quarter battle training in the SAS is conducted at the regiment's purpose-built facility in Hereford, known as the Killing House. The structure is a multi-room building with reconfigurable walls, furnished with mannequins representing hostages and terrorists, and candidates fire live ammunition, thousands upon thousands of rounds, in scenarios designed to train instinctive target discrimination at ranges measured in meters. By the time a candidate completes CQB training, he has fired an estimated 5,000 rounds in the Killing House alone. He can enter a room, identify hostile and non-hostile targets, and engage every threat with aimed shots to the head and torso in under 2 seconds. He has done this so many times that the process has migrated from conscious decision-making to reflexive motor pattern. His hands move before his brain has finished processing. That is the 17-second room clearance. That is what the American officer watching the drone feed couldn't understand. Former Director of Special Forces Brigadier Graham Lamb, who oversaw British special operations in Iraq during the critical escalation period, described the SAS operator's advantage in terms of accumulated repetition. An American special operator is extremely good, Lamb told journalist Sean Raymond. But our blokes have been doing CQB since the Iranian embassy in 1980. That's 25 years of institutional muscle memory. When they go through a door, they're not thinking. They're executing a program that's been refined by every hostage rescue, every Northern Ireland entry, every training cycle for a quarter of a century. You can't buy that with money. This was the force that the Pentagon assessment said was too small and too cautious for Baghdad. Task Force Black began expanding its operational tempo in late 2005 and early 2006, under conditions that would have paralyzed a less adaptable force. They operated from a compound within the massive American base at Balad, north of Baghdad, but their operations were concentrated in the most dangerous districts of the capital, Sada City, Adhamiyah, Dora, and the industrial zones east of the Tigris, where Al-Qaeda in Iraq had established bomb factories and execution chambers. The distances involved were significant. From Balad to central Baghdad was approximately 65 kilometers by road, a route that passed through some of the most heavily IED'd terrain in Iraq. Helicopter assets were limited. The British had access to a small number of Puma and Lynx helicopters, but nothing approaching the fleet of MHS 60 Black Hawks and MHS 47 Chinooks that American Special Operations could call upon through the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. The solution was characteristically British. They adapted. When helicopters weren't available, they drove. When the roads were too dangerous for conventional vehicles, they used modified Land Rover WMIKs and later Jackal patrol vehicles fitted with electronic countermeasure equipment to defeat radio-controlled IEDs. When even those vehicles drew too much attention, they used unmarked civilian cars, a technique perfected during decades of covert operations in Northern Ireland. The SAS had been running surveillance and direct action operations from civilian vehicles in Belfast since 1969. Baghdad, for all its chaos, was a permissive environment by comparison. The intelligence architecture that powered Task Force Black's operations was a hybrid system that married British human intelligence, HUMINT, with American signals intelligence and surveillance platforms. British contributed something the Americans had in desperately short supply: Arabic-speaking intelligence officers with experience running agent networks in hostile urban environments. These personnel, drawn from the Intelligence Corps and the Secret Intelligence Service, MI6, had been developing networks in Iraq since before the 2003 invasion. They understood tribal dynamics, sectarian fault lines, and the social geography of Baghdad's neighborhoods in a way that no satellite or drone could replicate. Their agents weren't technical assets. They were people: shopkeepers, taxi drivers, tribal elders, disillusioned insurgents, who provided the kind of granular, real-time intelligence that allowed Task Force Black to do what the Pentagon thought was impossible: find targets faster than those targets could move. An American intelligence officer who worked alongside Task Force Black at the Balad Fusion Center later described the British approach to journalist Mark Urban. They'd come in with a name and a neighborhood. We'd say, "That's not enough." They'd say, "Watch." 48 hours later, they'd have a grid reference, a pattern of life, and a window. We'd still be processing the initial intelligence packet. The operations themselves were executed with a tempo that accelerated throughout 2006 and into 2007 until it reached a pace that hadn't been seen in special operations warfare since the SAS's own campaigns in the Western Desert in 1942. At their peak, Task Force Black was conducting between 5 and 7 raids per night, with a force that never exceeded 60 operators in country at any given time. This means that every operator was going through a door, clearing a building, and engaging armed insurgents multiple times per week. A sustained operational intensity that no selection process, no training regime, and no budget can fully prepare a human being for. Only the accumulated experience of previous operations can sustain performance at that level. The SAS had been accumulating that experience continuously since Malaya in 1950. The targeting methodology was ruthlessly systematic. Task Force Black didn't chase random insurgents. They mapped networks. Using a combination of HUMINT from their agent networks, SIGINT from American and British electronic surveillance, and pattern of life analysis from drone feeds, they identified the key nodes in Al-Qaeda in Iraq's operational structure: the bomb makers, the financiers, the logistics coordinators, the cell commanders. Then, they removed those nodes, one by one, night after night. The effect was devastating, and for the insurgents, inexplicable. In the Dora district of southern Baghdad, a neighborhood that had become one of AQI's most important operational bases, Task Force Black conducted a sustained series of raids over a period of approximately 12 weeks in mid-2006. The district was a nightmare landscape of narrow streets, dense residential blocks, and a population terrorized into silence by AQI's murder squads. American conventional forces had attempted to clear Dora multiple times and failed. The insurgents simply melted into the civilian population, waited for the cordon to lift, and resumed operations within days. Task Force Black's approach was fundamentally different. They didn't cordon and search. They identified specific individuals. A bomb maker, working from a garage near the intersection of two particular streets. A cell commander, who used a specific mobile phone to coordinate attacks. A financier who moved money through a particular Hawala network. And they took them off the battlefield with surgical precision. Raids were fast, violent, and targeted. Entry teams of 4 to 6 operators, moving in unmarked vehicles, would approach a target compound in the early hours of the morning. A surveillance team, sometimes in position for 48 hours or more, would confirm the target's presence. The entry team would breach the door, using explosive charges, mechanical breaching tools, or shotgun-applied ballistic breaches, depending on the door construction, clear the building room by room, and either capture or kill the target. The entire operation, from vehicle dismount to extraction, rarely lasted more than 15 minutes. The precision was breathtaking, but it wasn't accidental. Every raid followed a methodology that had been developed, tested, and refined across 40 years of operations. From the streets of Belfast to the jungles of Sierra Leone to the mountains of Afghanistan. The 4-man entry team was the foundational tactical unit, a point man carrying a shotgun or battering ram for the initial breach, followed by the number 2 man with a suppressed carbine who would be the first to engage any threat inside the doorway, followed by the 3 and 4 men who would clear laterally, one left, one right, the moment they crossed the threshold. Each man's arc of fire was precisely delineated. Each man trusted absolutely that the operator beside him would cover his designated zone. This trust wasn't theoretical. It was earned through thousands of repetitions in the killing house, hundreds of live operations, and a selection process that had already eliminated every individual incapable of performing under ultimate stress. Outside the target compound, a cordon element of between 4 and 8 operators secured the perimeter. Snipers armed with L11, 5A3 long-range rifles or suppressed HK417 designated marksman rifles covered the exits from elevated positions. A quick reaction force, usually mounted in Jackal vehicles or armed Land Rovers, held a position within 2 minutes' drive in case of a larger-than-expected enemy response. Communications were maintained through encrypted personal role radios, with every operator on the same net, enabling real-time coordination that was seamless to the point of appearing telepathic. The intelligence exploitation phase was as critical as the kinetic action. Within seconds of securing a compound, designated operators would begin a methodical search for documents, electronic devices, weapons caches, and any materials that could feed the next raid. Mobile phones were gold. A single phone recovered from a dead or captured insurgent could contain numbers, text messages, and call logs that mapped an entire cell structure. Laptops and USB drives were extracted whole and immediately transported back to the fusion center at Balad, where intelligence analysts, both British and American, could begin processing within the hour. This was the engine that drove the tempo. Every raid produced intelligence. Every piece of intelligence produced new targets. The cycle fed itself with an accelerating momentum that the insurgents simply could not outpace. One intelligence officer, assigned to the British element at Balad, described the pace of exploitation to a post-deployment debrief that was later partially declassified. We were producing actionable intelligence from a captured phone within 90 minutes of the raid. Sometimes, we had a new target package ready before the operators had finished debriefing the previous hit. There were nights where the same 4-man team hit 3 different compounds in 5 hours. Each raid triggered by intelligence recovered from the previous one, The insurgents had no idea how we were finding them so fast. Their operational security was designed to withstand conventional intelligence timelines, days or weeks between identification and action. We were operating in minutes. Over those 12 weeks in Dora, Task Force Black dismantled an AQI network that had been responsible for an estimated 3 car bomb attacks per week. In Baghdad, the key personnel were removed from the battlefield, some killed during raids when they resisted with weapons, some captured and transferred to detention facilities. By the end of the cycle, the car bomb attacks originating from Dora had dropped by over 80%. An American brigade commander whose unit operated in the area described the effect to journalist Sean Raymond. "We couldn't do what they did. We'd go in with a company strength element, 200 soldiers, helicopters, the whole 9 yards, and we'd come out with nothing. These guys went in with 12 men in 3 cars and came out with the guy we'd been hunting for 6 months. It was like watching a different war. But Dora was only one district. Across Baghdad, Task Force Black was replicating this methodology simultaneously. In Sadr city, where the Mahdi army militia loyal to cleric Muqtada al-Sadr ran a parallel insurgency alongside AQI, British operators conducted surveillance and direct action operations in a district of over 2 million people, where every resident was a potential lookout and every rooftop concealed a potential sniper position. In Adamiyah, one of the last Sunni-majority districts in eastern Baghdad, they targeted AQI commanders who were using the neighborhood as a staging area for suicide bombers being dispatched to Shia markets and mosques. In the rural areas south of Baghdad, along the so-called Triangle of Death, they intercepted weapons shipments and eliminated IED facilitation networks that were killing American soldiers at a rate of over 3 per week. The cumulative effect of these operations between late 2005 and the end of 2007 was quantified in classified after-action reports that have since been partially revealed through journalistic investigation and official inquiries. According to figures compiled by Mark Urban from multiple military and intelligence sources, Task Force Black was directly responsible for removing approximately 3,750 insurgent operatives from the battlefield over a 2-year period. Of these, the majority were captured alive and transferred to detention, a fact that demolishes the Pentagon's pre-deployment concern about overly restrictive rules of engagement. But a significant number, estimated at several hundred, were killed during raids when they engaged British operators with firearms, grenades, or suicide vests. The specific incident referenced in the title of this documentary, the disappearance of approximately 200 enemy fighters, relates to a concentrated period of operations in a single sector of Baghdad during the spring of 2007. Task Force Black, working in close coordination with American intelligence assets and supported by a dedicated ISR, intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance aircraft, conducted a deliberate campaign to dismantle an AQI network that had been identified as responsible for the majority of spectacular attacks in central Baghdad. The car bombs targeting markets, government buildings, and religious sites that were killing dozens of civilians per week. The network was estimated by coalition intelligence analysts to comprise between 180 and 220 active operatives, bomb makers, drivers, facilitators, safe house managers, financiers, and cell commanders. Over a period of approximately 90 days, Task Force Black systematically identified and targeted every node of this network. They started at the periphery, the drivers who moved car bombs from assembly points to deployment locations, the lookouts who surveilled target areas before attacks, and worked inward toward the leadership. Each raid produced intelligence, documents, phones, laptops, detainee interrogation reports. That was immediately fed back into the targeting cycle, producing fresh targets within hours. The methodology was devastatingly effective because it exploited a fundamental weakness in AQI's organizational structure. The network relied on a relatively small number of skilled specialists, perhaps 30 to 40 individuals, who possessed the technical knowledge to construct vehicle-borne IEDs, manage financing, and coordinate multi-cell operations. Remove those specialists, and the network's capacity to mount complex attacks collapsed far faster than raw numbers would suggest. Task Force Black understood this. They had studied it. British intelligence analysts drawing on decades of experience dismantling IRA cells in Northern Ireland, had mapped the critical dependencies within AQI's Baghdad command structure and identified the minimum number of key nodes that needed to be eliminated to render the network operationally defunct. The first 2 weeks of the campaign focused on the outer ring, couriers, lookouts, low-level facilitators. These individuals were comparatively easy to locate and were often willing to provide information after capture, particularly when confronted with evidence recovered from their own phones and documents. Week 3 through week 6 targeted the middle tier, cell commanders, vehicle procurement specialists, and the safe house network managers who moved bomb makers between locations to prevent targeting. These were harder targets. They changed phones frequently, used couriers instead of electronic communication, and moved between locations on unpredictable schedules. But the intelligence snowball was already rolling. Every captured facilitator provided another piece of the puzzle. Every recovered phone revealed another connection. By the end of week 6, British intelligence officers had constructed a network diagram so detailed that they could predict which safe houses would be used on which nights based on the patterns of previous movements. Weeks 7 through 12 targeted the core, the bomb makers themselves, the senior financiers, and the operational commander who had been directing the network's campaign of mass casualty attacks. These operations were the most dangerous. The targets knew they were being hunted. Some had begun sleeping in different locations every night. Some had surrounded themselves with armed bodyguards. At least 2 had rigged their safe houses with improvised explosive devices designed to kill anyone who breached the door. On one such operation, described in detail by multiple sources, a 4-man SAS entry team breached the front door of a residential compound in the Amiria district and immediately triggered a command wire IED concealed behind the interior wall. The device, estimated at approximately 5 kilograms of homemade explosive, detonated less than 2 meters from the lead operator. The blast blew him back through the doorway and into the courtyard. His body armor, an Osprey system fitted with enhanced ceramic plates rated to defeat 7.62 mm rifle rounds, absorbed the majority of the fragmentation. He suffered a perforated eardrum, lacerations to his hands and face, and a concussion classified as moderate traumatic brain injury. He was back on operations within 72 hours. The remaining 3 operators continued the clearance, killing 2 armed insurgents in the ground floor rooms and capturing the primary target, one of the network's senior bomb makers, as he attempted to escape through a rear window. The captured individual was carrying a mobile phone that contained direct communications with the network's operational commander. That phone led to the final target. Former SAS operator and author Chris Ryan, who maintained close contacts with serving members of the regiment throughout this period, later described the tempo. They were going out every single night, sometimes twice, sometimes 3 times in one night. The blokes were running on adrenaline, caffeine, and muscle memory. A 4-man team would clear a building, extract a target, get back to base, debrief for 30 minutes, get the next target package, and go out again. This went on for weeks. By the end of the 90-day period, the network had ceased to exist as a functional organization. Coalition intelligence assessments concluded that between 187 and 212 operatives had been removed from the battlefield, killed during raids, captured and detained, or driven to flee Baghdad entirely. The spectacular attack rate in central Baghdad dropped by over 60% in the immediate aftermath. An American general officer, speaking at a classified briefing that was later referenced in congressional testimony, described the result in terms that represented a total reversal of the Pentagon's original assessment. Task Force Black achieved with 60 men what we couldn't achieve with 6,000. They didn't just degrade the network. They collapsed it. The tactical mechanics of how this was achieved reveal the difference between a training system that produces operators and a procurement system that produces equipment. Every advantage Task Force Black held was rooted in individual and small team capability developed over years of training and operational experience. Their room-clearing speed, the 17-second standard, meant that targets had no time to destroy intelligence materials. Their marksmanship, honed through hundreds of thousands of rounds in the killing house, and on operational deployments, meant that engagements were resolved with minimal collateral damage. Their surveillance skills, inherited from decades of operations in Northern Ireland, meant that they could position observation teams within meters of a target compound for days without detection. One particularly revealing incident, described in multiple accounts, illustrates the training advantage at its most extreme. During a raid on a suspected bomb factory in the Rashid district of southern Baghdad, the entry team breached the front door and immediately encountered 3 armed men in the hallway. The lead operator, carrying a suppressed Colt Canada C8 carbine, the SAS's primary weapon in Iraq, engaged all 3 with aimed shots in under 1.5 seconds. 6 rounds, 3 targets, all 3 were hit in the upper chest and head. The operator's heart rate, measured by a biometric monitoring device he was wearing as part of a joint medical study with the Americans, was recorded at 78 beats per minute at the moment of engagement. 78. A resting heart rate. His body had been conditioned by thousands of hours of training to treat close-quarters combat as a technical exercise, not a life-threatening emergency. The Americans monitoring the medical data couldn't believe the readings. A Delta Force officer later told a British liaison, "Our guys are good. Your guys are machines." But the British weren't machines. They were paying a physical and psychological price that wouldn't become fully apparent for years. The sustained operational tempo, 5 to 7 raids per night, week after week, month after month, produced cumulative fatigue that manifested in injuries, errors, and eventually, for some operators, post-traumatic stress that would shadow them long after they left Iraq. At least 2 SAS operators were killed during Task Force Black operations, and several more were wounded in engagements and IED strikes. The regiment's medical officer at Hereford later reported a significant increase in musculoskeletal injuries, particularly to knees, ankles, and spines, among personnel who had completed multiple Iraq rotations. The weight of body armor, weapons, and breaching equipment carried on every raid, estimated at between 30 and 40 kilograms per operator, compounded by the explosive physical demands of room clearance and vehicle-mounted operations, ground bodies down with mechanical inevitability. Senior NCOs who had served through the heaviest period of operations described a force operating at the ragged edge of sustainability. One sergeant major, speaking anonymously to journalist Mark Urban, said, "We were effective because we were good, but we were also effective because we didn't stop. The enemy couldn't recover because we hit them every night, but neither could we." There were blokes on their 3rd or 4th rotation who were carrying injuries that would have had them medically discharged in peacetime. They didn't stop because the bloke next to them hadn't stopped. This honesty about the cost is essential to understanding why the achievement mattered. Task Force Black didn't succeed because they had superior technology, overwhelming numbers, or unlimited budgets. They succeeded because the British Special Forces system, from the initial selection on the Brecon Beacons through years of progressive training and operational deployment, produced individual operators who could function at the highest level of combat effectiveness under sustained physical and psychological stress. The Pentagon's assessment measured capability in hardware. The British measured it in people. The strategic implications extended far beyond Baghdad. Task Force Black's success in dismantling AQI networks during 2006 and 2007 contributed directly to the conditions that made the American troop surge of 2007 effective. General David Petraeus, who commanded multinational force Iraq during the surge, publicly acknowledged the role of coalition special operations, a term widely understood to include British forces, in degrading insurgent leadership to the point where political reconciliation became possible. In private communications later revealed through various accounts, Petraeus was more specific. He credited the British Special Forces' contribution as disproportionate to their numbers and essential to the overall campaign. The reversal of the Pentagon's original warning became something of a dark joke within the special operations community. The same planning cell that had recommended against expanding the British footprint in Baghdad was forced to produce a follow-up assessment in early 2008 that concluded, in language remarkable for its institutional humility, that the British Special Forces Task Force has demonstrated a capability-to-numbers ratio unmatched by any other coalition element in the Iraq theater. A senior American special operations officer, who had initially endorsed the warning against British expansion, later admitted to a British counterpart, "We measured you by our standards. We should have measured you by yours." The legacy of Task Force Black extends beyond the specific operational achievements in Iraq. It demonstrated a principle that military theorists have understood since Sun Tzu, but that modern defense procurement consistently ignores. Quality, driven by training and selection, defeats quantity. 60 operators, operating from a single compound using modified civilian vehicles and a hybrid intelligence system, achieved effects that thousands of conventional troops supported by billions of dollars of technology could not replicate. The principle was not new. The SAS had demonstrated it in the jungles of Malaya in the 1950s, where four-man patrols spending weeks in deep jungle dismantled communist terrorist networks that battalions of infantry couldn't find. They demonstrated it in Oman in the 1970s, where a handful of SAS soldiers, supported by locally recruited irregulars, defeated a Soviet and Chinese-backed insurgency that threatened to close the Strait of Hormuz. They demonstrated it at the Iranian embassy in 1980, where a single squadron ended a 6-day siege in 11 minutes. They demonstrated it in the Falklands in 1982, where SAS reconnaissance patrols inserted behind Argentine lines provided the intelligence that enabled the entire ground campaign. What Iraq proved was that the principle scaled. It worked not just for single operations, but for sustained campaigns, not just against guerrillas in jungles, but against sophisticated urban insurgent networks operating in a city of 7 million people, not just with colonial-era weapons, but integrated into the most advanced intelligence architecture ever constructed. The SAS selection and training system, the long drag, the killing house, the decades of accumulated operational experience, produced operators who could adapt to any environment, any threat, and any tempo. The Pentagon warning was wrong not because it was poorly analyzed, but because it was analyzing the wrong variables. 200 enemy fighters didn't vanish because of superior equipment. They didn't vanish because of superior numbers. They vanished because 60 men walked through their doors in the dark every night for 90 days. And those 60 men had been forged in a system that had been producing exactly this result since David Sterling first sketched his idea for a small unit of exceptional individuals on a hospital bed in Cairo in 1941. A warning said, "Don't send the British." They sent them anyway. And 200 of the most dangerous insurgents in Baghdad disappeared from the face of the earth. The cost was real. The strain was unsustainable. The operators who did this carry it still. But the result stands as the most concentrated demonstration of special operations effectiveness in the 21st century, achieved not by the largest or the richest or the most technologically advanced force in Iraq, but by the one that had spent 63 years learning how to build the individual who could do what no machine, no drone, and no army could do alone. Go through the door, clear the room, find the target, get out. Do it again tomorrow. That is the system. That is the legacy. That is why you don't ignore the warning, and why you don't bet against the British.